Before we left for spring break, we were reading a chapter book called Rosie Revere and the Raucous Riveters. We were at a couple chapters in, but I thought, you know what? I should restart and let you guys enjoy the whole story from start to finish. So I'm going to read the first 3 chapters today. So, Rosie Revere and the Raucous Riveters. Chapter 1. Rosie Revere put on her safety goggles. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Ready," said Ada Twist. "Ready," said Iggy Peck. They signaled thumbs up from behind the kitchen counter. "Here goes," said Rosie. She hit the big button off the countometer. A scratchy computer voice blared from its speaker. Countdown. 5. Rosie ducked to her safety booth. 4. She flipped open her notebook. 3. She put her pencil from behind her ear. 2. Suddenly, Gizmo flew into the kitchen and landed on the contraption. "Duck!" yelled Rosie. Gizmo chirped angrily. "I know you're not a duck," yelled Rosie. 1! The 3 kids dived for Gizmo just as boom! The contraption exploded. Splat, splot, slurp, sticky red glops of ketchup flew everywhere. But Gizmo zoomed ahead of the storm. She soared up and out of the way. She looped and gently landed on the refrigerator. "Zowie!" said Ada, wiping ketchup from her googles. "Yikes!" said Iggy, wiping ketchup from his sweater. Said Rosie, taping her pencil on the notebook. Rosie looked at the mess and wrote a quick note. "Testing in the kitchen. Bad idea." Oh, look at that explosion. Chapter 2. There's a snake problem, so I guarantee you some snakes are going to be in here. Ada and Iggy had been helping Rosie all morning. She was trying to invent something for her uncle zookeeper Fred. Uncle Fred had a big snake problem and a little snake problem and a green snake problem, and Uncle Fred had an every kind of snake problem. Every kind of snake in the zoo loved him. They slithered out of the cages and into his office. They hid in his desk, his pockets, even in his lunch. One day, a smooth green snake named Vern hid in his sandwich. Uncle Fred thought that Vern was a wiggly pickle and almost took a bite. After that, Uncle Fred called Rosie. She invented a contraption to scare away snakes. She called it the Snake Away. It failed. She tried again and again and again. Rosie invented 5 models. They all failed, but she did not give up. Uncle Fred needed her help. Rosie had hoped that the Snake Away Model 5 would do the job. She looked at the mess. The fake snake on the table was covered in ketchup. It looked like a gigantic striped French fry with fangs. Uncle Fred would not like the invention that left ketchup all over his desk, but he was a mustard kind of guy. And besides, it might attract ants and possibly French fries. Rosie added some notes to her testing. Model 1, fabulous flop. Model 2, magnificent mess. Model 3, creative catastrophe. Model 4, distinguished dud. Model 5, catchy kerfuffle. The 3 friends cleaned up the mess. Then they shared peanut butter and honey sandwiches and talked about why the test failed. After lunch, Ada and Iggy went home and Rosie kept working. She looked at the contraption. A tube had exploded because a kink in the line blocked the ketchup. The pressure of the ketchup built up until boom! "Aha," said Rosie. She jotted down ideas to fix the problem. Snake Away Model 6 would work better. She was sure of it. Well, she was almost sure. There was only one way to find out. She would make changes to the machine and test again. Rosie was about to start when she heard a familiar whirring, purring, clanging, banging sound and looked out the window. It was Great Aunt Rose. Rosie stuck her pencil behind her ear, crammed her notebook in her pocket, and ran outside as Aunt Rose landed in the Helo cheese copter in her yard. "Hey, hey!" called Aunt Rose. "How's my favorite engineer?" Aunt Rose hopped out of the aircraft and twirled Rosie around in a giant hug. "My new invention is a disaster," said Rosie. "Brilliant," said Aunt Rose. "Tell me more about it on the way." "Are we going somewhere?" asked Rosie. "You bet we are," said Aunt Rose. "And there's no time to lose. This is an emergency." Chapter 3. There's some gears. And it says, things with gears. Cars, bikes, clocks, cheese copter. Counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise. Gears. So they have all these gears that are turning different directions to make them work. Last chapter today. Chapter 3. Rosie put on her helmet and Aunt Rose hit the switch. The cheese copter sputtered and twitched. It jumped and bumped. It shot into the air and off they flew. They zoomed over the neighbor's garden. "Woohoo, that's a dozy," said Aunt Rose. Indeed, Mrs. Lou's garden was a doozy. She was a master gardener, and it showed. Each year she planted flowers and grasses to create giant scenes in her yard. This year, her plants looked like a giant goose. Daisies, asters, and marigolds painted the picture. Tall, fluffy pampas stalks completed the scene. They swayed in the breeze and made the goose come to life. Rosie looked down just as someone ran into the garden shed wearing a long duster, a big hat, dark glasses, and rubber gloves. It was Mrs. Lou. Rosie knew 2 things about Mrs. Lou. 1. She was mysterious. Rosie never saw her outside during the day without her disguise. 2. She didn't like Rosie. Mrs. Lou never said that, but then she never said anything to Rosie. They were neighbors, but Mrs. Lou never even waved at Rosie. Once, Rosie even saw Mrs. Lou in the window and waved. Mrs. Lou closed the curtains. Rosie had another clue. All the neighbors knew that Rosie was an engineer. They left recycling treasures on the curb for her, but not Mrs. Lou. She kept her recycle in a wooden crates on her porch. But before I turn, there's the cheese copter. Instead of her curb. She didn't want Rosie getting into the crates. Luckily, the recyclers, Bee and Bew, sneaked the crates to Rosie's porch when she was at school. Rosie was glad they did. The crates were full of gears and wires, tools, and broken motors. Mrs. Lou didn't like Rosie, but she sure did have great recycling. Aunt Rose steered the cheese copter up, up, and away. "Woo-hoo!" yelled Aunt Rose. "I do love a fancy garden." Rosie looked back at Mrs. Lou's garden shed just as a pair of gloves snapped the curtain shut. All right, that's it for today.